My parents wanted me to drop out of college to fund my siblings' education. I refused and got disowned. Now they want me back after I landed a university job. I've always known that my parents didn't care about me as much as they did about Liam or Sarah. It's been that way since we were kids. But for some reason, I never expected them to just cut me off like that. I mean, who disowns their own kid just because they want to stay in college? But here we are, so let me break this down. I'm in my second year of university. It's not some Ivy League school like Liam got into, but it's a good state university and I worked hard as hell to get there. I'm doing fine, nothing spectacular, but I'm passing and I've got some friends, which is more than I ever had in high school. Things were going all right for the first semester, but then the second semester started and everything went to crap. It was one of those Saturdays where I'd been in my room all morning, just doing schoolwork and catching up on some Netflix. I hadn't even thought about what my parents were up to because, they don't really care what I'm doing anyway. Around lunchtime, they call me downstairs, like it's some kind of emergency family meeting. I walk down and I'm thinking, oh, maybe they're finally going to ask me about how school's going or I don't know, show some interest in my life. Yeah, right. I sit down on the couch and my dad starts talking. He's using that lawyer voice he's got, the one where he sounds all reasonable, but you can tell he's just manipulating the conversation. He's like, Maya, we've been thinking about your future. We want to talk to you about something important. And in my head, I'm like, okay, maybe they've got some advice about internships or something. Nope, my dad goes, we've decided that it would be best for you to take a break from college. I swear my brain froze for a second. I literally didn't understand what he was saying. I asked him, what do you mean, take a break? And my mom jumps in with this fake sympathetic tone, you've been doing okay, honey, but we think it's time you start contributing more to the family. Liam is starting law school soon, and we need to make sure Sarah's future is secure too. That's when it hit me. They wanted me to quit school and get a job to help pay for Liam's law school and Sarah's college fund. No joke, they didn't even try to sugarcoat it. My own parents were asking me to give up my education, something I've been busting my ass for so they could support Liam and Sarah. Like, what the actual hell? I just sat there staring at them, trying to process it. Are you serious? I asked. My dad, still in that damn lawyer voice, goes, this is a practical solution, Maya. College hasn't been working out as well for you as we hoped. We think it's better if you start working full-time and contribute to the household. You can always go back to school later. Go back later like it's that easy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to explain that I was doing fine in school, that I had plans for my future, but they weren't having it. My mom, always the queen of passive-aggressive insults, says, not everyone is cut out for higher education, Maya. There's no shame in honest work. At that point, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I lost it. So you want me to drop out so you can pay for Liam and Sarah? I asked, my voice cracking. What about my future? Do I not matter at all? And you know what they did. My dad sighed like he was so disappointed in me, and my mom just shook her head. We've given you plenty of chances, Maya, my dad said. You've never been as focused as your siblings. We're just being realistic about where you fit in this family. That hit hard, like really hard. It wasn't just about the money or school. It was about how they've always seen me, like I'm some sort of afterthought, a backup plan if Liam or Sarah doesn't pan out. And in that moment, I realized that no matter what I did, I was never going to be good enough for them. So I did something I never thought I'd have the guts to do. I stood up, looked them dead in the eyes, and said, I'm not dropping out. If you're done with me, fine. I'll figure it out on my own. The room went dead silent. My mom looked like she'd just seen a ghost, and my dad, well, he just looked pissed. I think they honestly thought I'd cave, that I'd just nod my head and agree to their stupid plan. But not this time. I was done being their backup plan. So, after that whole conversation with my parents, I was still pretty much in shock, like, what just happened? One minute I'm in college, doing fine, and the next I'm being told I'm basically useless and need to quit everything I've been working for to help Liam and Sarah. It was like a slap to the face, but at the same time I kind of wasn't surprised. This was just how it always was with them. Liam and Sarah were the stars, and I was, I don't know, the background character. Anyway, after I told them I wasn't quitting school, things got even weirder. My dad didn't say anything at first, just kind of stared at me like I'd insulted him. Then my mom, of course, started with the tears, classic. She's sitting there crying and saying, we're doing this for you, Maya. We just want what's best for the family. But all I could think was, how is this for me? They wanted to sacrifice my future to make sure Liam and Sarah had theirs set up. I was done. I'd had enough of their guilt trips and their constant favoritism, so I told them flat out, I'm not quitting school. If that's what you want from me, I'll just leave. I expected more yelling, more tears, maybe even a fight. But instead, my mom just kept crying and my dad muttered something about, you'll regret this decision. But they didn't try to stop me. It's like they didn't even care if I left or stayed. I went upstairs and grabbed my old suitcase, the one we used to take on family vacations. I hadn't used it in years. It felt weird pulling it out, like I was packing for a trip, but this time I wasn't sure when or if I'd be coming back. I started throwing clothes in, nothing fancy, just essentials, a few pairs of jeans, some t-shirts, my favorite hoodie. I couldn't even think straight, but I knew I had to get out of there before I lost my nerve. As I was packing, I heard my parents downstairs. My mom was still crying and my dad was pacing back and forth, talking to her like I wasn't even there. He kept saying things like, she'll come to her senses, and she's always been difficult. That word, difficult, made my blood boil. It was like they didn't even see me as a person, just a problem to be fixed. It took everything in me not to scream at them. Instead, I just kept packing. I grabbed my laptop, a few notebooks, and the sketchbook I'd been working on. Art's always been my escape, and I figured I'd need it now more than ever. I threw everything into the suitcase and zipped it up. It was heavy as hell, but I didn't care. I was ready to go. The hardest part was walking down the stairs. I could feel my legs shaking and my stomach was in knots, but I knew I had to do this. My parents were still in the living room, acting like I wasn't even there. My mom had stopped crying and was just sitting there staring blankly at the wall, while my dad was scrolling through his phone, probably pretending to be busy with work stuff, typical. I stood there for a second, waiting for one of them to say something to try and stop me, but they didn't. They didn't even look up. It was like I didn't exist to them anymore. So I grabbed my suitcase, opened the front door, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, and that was it. I was gone. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know where I was going. I just started walking. My heart was racing, and I could feel the weight of everything hitting me all at once. I was officially on my own, no family, no home, just me and my suitcase. I must have walked for miles before I realized I had nowhere to go. I pulled out my phone and texted my friend Sarah. We weren't super close, but she'd always been there when I needed someone to talk to. I told her what happened, and within minutes she texted back, "Come crash at my place, we'll figure it out." Relief washed over me. At least I had somewhere to go for the night. I grabbed an Uber to Sarah's apartment, and when I got there, she hugged me like I was a lost puppy. She didn't even ask for details right away, just let me dump my stuff in her spare room and collapse on the couch. It was the first time I'd felt safe in hours. We didn't talk much that night. I was too tired and she didn't push. We just ordered pizza and watched some trashy reality show on Netflix until I passed out on the couch. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head, my parents asking me to quit school, the way they acted like it wasn't a big deal, the fact that they didn't even try to stop me from leaving. It was like I'd never really been part of their lives at all. But the longer I stayed at Sarah's, the clearer things became. I realized that, yeah, it sucked to leave home like that, but it was also the first time in forever that I felt like I was in control of my own life. No more bending over backward to please my parents, no more trying to fit into the mold they'd made for me. I could actually live for myself. I spent the next week figuring things out. I called my academic advisor, explained the situation, and she was amazing. She helped me apply for more financial aid and even got me into on-campus housing. I was going to be okay. It was weirdly freeing to realize that I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I was doing this on my own. One of the hardest parts, though, was when my parents texted me. It wasn't an apology, not even close. It was more like guilt-tripping, saying things like, "We hope you're okay," and "You should come home and we can talk." Yeah, right, they didn't care if I was okay, they just didn't want to look bad in front of the rest of the family. I ignored the texts and focused on getting my life back together. I also reached out to my Aunt Sarah, my mom's sister. She's the black sheep of the family, an artist who never really fit in with my parents' perfect vision of what success looks like. When I told her what happened, she was furious. "They did what?" she yelled over the phone. She offered to help me out financially until I could get back on my feet, and even said I could stay with her during breaks if I needed to. It was the first time in days that I didn't feel completely alone. By the end of that week, I'd moved into my dorm and I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, I'd be okay. I was scared as hell, don't get me wrong, but there was also this weird sense of freedom. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living under my parents' shadow. I could finally breathe. I've been living in my dorm for a while now, just trying to get used to everything. Honestly, it felt strange at first. I'd go to class, come back to my tiny room, and just sit there. Sometimes no yelling parents, no guilt trips, just silence. It was a weird feeling, but at the same time I was getting used to it. I started making friends at school, and my part-time job at the library was actually kind of nice, quiet, lots of time to think. Anyway, one day out of nowhere I get a text from Liam, yeah, that Liam, the golden boy who could do no wrong. I hadn't heard from him since I left, and honestly, I wasn't expecting to. I figured he'd side with my parents like always, pretend like nothing was wrong and keep being the perfect son. So when I saw his name pop up on my phone, I didn't even know if I wanted to respond, but curiosity got the best of me. The message was simple, can we meet up? I want to talk. No explanation, no apology, just that. I debated ignoring it, but part of me needed to hear what he had to say. So, after thinking about it for a while, I texted him back and told him we could meet at this little coffee shop halfway between my campus and his law school. At least, if things got awkward, I could bail easily. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. He looked different, like not his usual polished, perfect self. His hair was kind of messy, and his clothes weren't as sharp as they usually were. He even looked a little tired. For a second, I almost didn't recognize him. This wasn't the Liam I grew up with, the guy who always had everything together. It kind of threw me off. We sat down, ordered some coffee, and there was this awkward silence for a bit. I wasn't sure what to say, and I could tell he was struggling too. Finally, he broke the ice. "I'm sorry," he said, just like that. No build-up, no excuses, just an apology. I raised an eyebrow. "For what exactly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. "For everything, I guess," he continued, looking down at his coffee. "For not saying anything when you left, for not sticking up for you all these years. I don't know. I've always known how messed up it was, how they treated you, but it was easier to just go along with it." Hearing him admit that kind of hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know what to say. I'd always assumed Liam was clueless, that he was just the golden child who never noticed the way our parents treated me. But to hear him say he knew that he chose to stay silent, that stung. "So what changed?" I finally asked, still trying to wrap my head around the fact that he was actually apologizing. "Why are you telling me this now?" He let out a sigh and ran a hand through his messy hair. "I don't know, Mai. When you stood up to them, it made me realize how messed up things really are. I always knew, but I didn't want to admit it, you know? I was comfortable. I was the favorite. Why would I want to mess that up?" I nodded slowly, trying to take it all in. "So what do you want from me? Forgiveness?" "No," he said quickly. "I'm not asking for that. I just wanted to talk. I wanted you to know that I get it now. And I'm quitting law school." That was the real shocker, Liam quitting law school. The golden child, the future lawyer of the family. It didn't make sense. "Wait, what? You're quitting? Since when?" He looked me straight in the eye for the first time since we sat down. "Yeah, I've been miserable for months. I never even wanted to be a lawyer, you know? That was all Mom and Dad's idea. I've been faking it this whole time because I didn't want to disappoint them. But seeing you leave and actually do something for yourself, it made me realize I can't keep living like this." I was speechless. This was the same guy who never wavered, who always seemed so sure of himself. To hear him admit that he'd been miserable, that he was only doing what our parents wanted, it blew my mind. "So, what are you going to do?" I asked, still processing everything. He leaned back in his chair and smiled for the first time. "I'm going to be a teacher. That's what I've always wanted to do. I just never thought it was an option. But I'm done trying to live up to their expectations. I'm applying to an education program next semester." I didn't know whether to be happy for him or angry. Part of me was still pissed that he'd stayed silent all those years, that he never once stood up for me. But another part of me was proud of him for finally breaking away from our parents' control. It was a weird mix of emotions, and I wasn't sure how to feel. We sat there for a while, just talking about everything. He told me how hard it had been growing up with all the pressure from our parents, how he always felt like he had to be perfect. He admitted that he envied me for being able to walk away, for not caring about what they thought anymore. That kind of threw me off. I never thought Liam envied me. I always saw him as the one who had it all figured out. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was actually seeing Liam, not the perfect, polished version of him that our parents had created, but the real him. And honestly, he seemed just as lost as I was, maybe even more. As we wrapped up our conversation, Liam hesitated for a second before asking, "Do you think we could hang out more? I mean, I know I wasn't really there for you before, but I'd like to try, make things right." I didn't answer right away. It wasn't something I could just say yes to without thinking. But after everything he told me, after seeing this side of him I never knew existed, I figured maybe it was worth giving it a shot. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think we can try." He smiled, and for the first time in years it felt like we were actually on the same page. It wasn't perfect, and I still had a lot of anger and resentment to work through, but it was a start. As I walked back to my dorm that day, I couldn't help but feel a weird mix of emotions. I was still pissed at my parents, still trying to figure out what my next steps were, but at least I wasn't alone in it anymore. For once, Liam and I were in the same boat, both trying to figure out who we were outside of our parents' expectations. It wasn't the resolution I expected, but it was something, and for now, that was enough. So after that whole coffee meetup with Liam, I was feeling pretty weird about everything. I mean, on one hand, I was kind of glad he finally got what I've been going through. But on the other hand, I was still pissed at him for staying quiet all those years. And then there was the fact that I hadn't heard from my parents since I left. Nothing. It was like I just didn't exist to them anymore, which was honestly the most messed up part of it all. That is, until I got a message from my mom. It wasn't anything heartfelt or apologetic, though. It was more like a guilt trip disguised as concern. Typical. The text popped up one evening while I was sitting in my dorm room, trying to focus on some assignments. My phone buzzed, and there it was from my mom, "Maya, we've been thinking about you. We hope you're doing okay. Please come home. We miss you." Yeah, sure, they missed me. They missed having someone to boss around. At first, I wasn't even going to respond, but something about that message just rubbed me the wrong way. It was like they were pretending nothing had happened, like they didn't kick me out because I wouldn't quit school for Liam and Sarah. I sat there staring at my phone, debating whether to even bother replying. But then, before I knew it, my fingers were typing, "You guys miss me, really? You didn't seem to care when you asked me to drop out and pay for Liam and Sarah's future." "What's changed now?" I sent it before I could second-guess myself. There was no way I was letting them get away with acting like the past few months didn't happen. I wasn't going to just crawl back and pretend like everything was fine, because it wasn't. About an hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a longer message. My dad had jumped in, of course. He wrote, "Maya, that's not fair. We were trying to make the best decision for the family. We've always done what we thought was right for all of you, and sometimes that means making hard choices. But you've always been part of this family. It's not too late to come back and talk." I couldn't believe what I was reading. Hard choices for the family. What about me? It wasn't like I was asking for anything special, just a chance to have my own future. But here they were, making it sound like I was the one being unreasonable. It made my blood boil. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, but instead I took a deep breath and typed out another message. "You know what's not fair? Being treated like I don't matter. Being asked to give up everything for Liam and Sarah. I'm doing fine now, and I don't need you guys trying to guilt me into coming back just because you feel bad. You made your choice, I made mine." It took a few minutes, but my dad responded again, and this time he didn't hold back. "You're being selfish, Maya. We raised you, gave you everything you needed, and this is how you repay us. By abandoning your family when things get tough, I expected better from you, but I guess you've always been difficult." There it was again, difficult. That word they've always used to describe me when I didn't fit into their perfect little plans. Like, sorry I wasn't the star athlete or the beauty pageant winner or whatever they wanted me to be. I was done with that word, done with their guilt trips. I didn't reply, I couldn't. I didn't have the energy to argue with them anymore. The next few days were quiet. I didn't hear from them again, and honestly I was relieved. But then things got even worse. A few of my relatives, my aunt, my grandma, even a cousin, started texting me out of the blue. Turns out my parents had been talking to them, probably to paint me as the villain who abandoned the family. My aunt's message was the worst. She said something like, "Maya, you need to apologize to your parents. They're heartbroken over this. You're tearing the family apart." I wanted to scream. How was I tearing the family apart? All I did was stand up for myself, for once. It's not like I asked them to choose between me and Liam or Sarah. They did that all on their own, and now I was the bad guy. At this point I knew I needed some backup. I called Aunt Sarah, the only family member who actually understood what I was going through. When I told her what had been happening, she didn't even hesitate. "Your parents are full of it, Maya," she said straight up. "They're trying to control you because they're losing their grip. Don't fall for it. You're doing great on your own and they just can't stand it." Hearing her say that made me feel a lot better. It was like I finally had permission to not care what my parents thought anymore. Aunt Sarah had always been the one to go against the grain in our family. She never followed the rules, never tried to fit into the mold, and she was doing just fine. Maybe it was time I started following her lead. But then, just when I thought things were calming down, I got another message from my parents. This one was different, though. It wasn't just a guilt trip. My mom said they were selling the house. "We've decided to downsize. The house is too big for just the two of us now that Liam is away at law school and Sarah's getting ready for college. We hope you understand." I stared at the message in shock. The house I grew up in, the place that had been my home, even if it never really felt like it, was being sold. They didn't even give me a heads up, didn't ask if I wanted to come get my stuff or anything. It was like they were wiping me out of their lives, one step at a time. I didn't reply. What was I supposed to say? "Oh, cool, thanks for selling my childhood out from under me." Yeah, no thanks. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing it hurt me, but it did. A lot. Over the next week, I kept getting updates from other relatives about the house being sold. My parents were moving into some smaller place in a nicer neighborhood, apparently. It was like they were setting up this whole new life without me, and I was just supposed to be okay with it. But honestly, as hard as it was, I think it was the final push I needed to really let go. The house, the family, the whole messed up dynamic, it was all behind me now. They'd made their choice and I'd made mine. There was no going back. By the end of that week, I blocked their numbers. I didn't want to hear from them anymore. I didn't need their guilt trips or their constant reminders that I was never going to be good enough for them. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. It was scary as hell, but it also felt kind of amazing. After I blocked my parents' numbers, things got kind of quiet. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no constant barrage of guilt trips or messages from relatives trying to talk some sense into me. It was just peaceful. At first, I didn't know what to do with that quiet. It felt weird, like something was missing. I guess I'd gotten so used to the chaos that being on my own, really on my own, was a whole new world. Life started to settle into a rhythm after that. My classes were going well, and I'd gotten the hang of balancing work and school. The library job turned out to be a lifesaver, not just for the paycheck, but for the quiet space to clear my head. I wasn't constantly stressed about what my parents thought of me or trying to live up to their expectations. I was just living. But then, out of nowhere, I get another message. This time, it wasn't from my parents or some random relative. It was from Sarah, yeah, my little sister, who had basically been the perfect princess her whole life, the one who always got the best of everything, from mom's constant attention to the nicest birthday parties. We hadn't really talked since I left, so seeing her name pop up on my phone was a surprise. Her message was simple: "Hey, can we talk?" I wasn't sure what to make of it. I mean, Sarah had never been mean to me or anything, but she never really stuck up for me either. She was just kind of there, doing her own thing, living in her bubble. So why now? Why did she suddenly want to talk? I debated ignoring it, but after staring at the message for a few minutes, I decided to reply, "Sure, what's up?" We ended up setting a time to talk later that night. I wasn't sure what to expect, and to be honest, I was kind of nervous. What if she was just calling to guilt me too? Or worse, what if she was mad at me for leaving? When I picked up the phone, Sarah's voice was quiet, not the bubbly, happy tone I was used to hearing from her. She sounded different. Right off the bat, she apologized. "I'm sorry, Maya," she said. "I didn't really get it before, about you, about what you've been dealing with." That threw me off. I wasn't expecting her to say something like that. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my guard up, just in case. Sarah sighed, and I could hear her shifting around on the other end of the phone, like she was struggling to find the right words. "Mom and Dad have been talking a lot about you since you left," she explained. "But I've been thinking about everything too, and I realized they've been kind of awful to you. Like, I always knew things were different for you, but I didn't really see it, you know." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to be mad at her for not realizing it sooner, but another part of me just felt sad that she was only just now seeing how messed up things had been. "Yeah, it's been pretty rough," I finally said, trying to keep my voice calm. Sarah kept talking, and for the first time, she opened up about her own struggles. She talked about the pressure Mom put on her to always be perfect, how every little thing she did had to be the best, or it wasn't good enough. It was like she was trapped in this constant competition, always trying to live up to Mom's impossible standards. It wasn't the same as what I'd gone through, but I could tell it was weighing on her in a way I hadn't seen before. "I've been so scared of disappointing them," Sarah admitted. "Like if I mess up even once, it'll all fall apart. But seeing you leave and stand up for yourself, it made me realize I don't want to live like that either. I don't want to be perfect all the time." I wasn't sure how to feel. On one hand, I was glad Sarah was finally starting to see things clearly. On the other, I was still carrying a lot of anger and hurt from how I'd been treated for so long. But I couldn't just push her away. She was reaching out in a way that felt real, and I knew how hard it was to break away from the pressure our parents put on us. "I get it," I told her. "It's tough to stand up to them, but you've got to do what's right for you. You can't keep living for them." We talked for a long time that night, and by the end of it, something had shifted between us. It wasn't perfect, and I still had my guard up, but for the first time I felt like I had a real connection with Sarah, not the picture-perfect sister she always tried to be, but the real Sarah, the one who was struggling just like I had been. After that conversation, things started to change even more. Sarah and I kept in touch, talking every few days, just checking in on each other. She was still figuring things out, but I could tell she was trying to take control of her own life, not just live the one our parents wanted for her. And in a weird way, I felt proud of her. She was starting to stand up for herself, and that took guts. Meanwhile, I was finally feeling like I was building a life that was mine. I joined a student group for people with toxic family backgrounds, and it was nice to have people to talk to who understood what I was going through. I wasn't the only one dealing with messed up family dynamics, and that made me feel less alone. One day, out of the blue, I got an email from the University Counseling Center. They'd heard about the support group I was part of and wanted me to help develop a peer support program for other students dealing with similar issues. It was a paid position, and it felt like everything I'd been through was finally being put to good use. I could actually help other people who were struggling, and that felt huge. I started working on ideas for the program, drawing from my own experiences and the stories I'd heard from others in the group. It was like all the crap I dealt with, my parents, the guilt trips, the pressure, was finally turning into something positive, something that could actually make a difference. And as I sat there sketching out plans for the program, I realized something. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I didn't need them to see me, to validate me, or to tell me I was doing a good job. I had built my own life, and for the first time, I felt like I was in control of it. Sure, there were still tough days where I missed the idea of having a normal family, where I wished things could have been different. But I was okay with that. I was learning how to be okay with myself, and that was something my parents could never take away from me.